Before we begin, allow me to briefly take you back in time to the 1950s and to what many would consider the beginning of the golden era of dive watches. Blancpain had just released the 50 Fathoms, one of the first dive watches to sport a unidirectional bezel, followed closely by the Rolex Submariner and the Omega Seamaster 300, just to name a few. It was a golden era indeed, primarily defined by practicality and function, and which has since spawned a massive appreciation for mechanical tool watches among modern collectors. Not to mention countless vintage-inspired watches. Now, if you're a fellow legacy enthusiast like myself, you may have heard of the classic watch brand Squale, perhaps through the Urban Gentry, a fellow YouTube channel devoted to everything horology. Squale was at the center of the golden era of dive watches, making watch cases for some of the most influential brands of that era, including Doxa, Tag Heuer, and Blancpain. When WHATAWATCHES, a South Korean corner shop and watch nerd haven, decided to expand their portfolio a few years ago and develop a dive watch of their own, they ultimately called on Squale, a company with experience in that realm and a mutual respect of classic dive watch aesthetics. That watch is the Sub 3920 Corso Italiano. I've always considered owning a Squale, but never really pulled the trigger on one. However, our friends over at WHATAWATCHES have blessed us with a stunning white Artico dial model for me to review in the middle for you here. It follows the booming neo-vintage trend, taking the industry by storm that favors smaller watches, such as the 37mm Tudor Blancpain 54, a trend that I happen to be a huge fan of. You'll also notice that the Corso Italiano is a no-date, time-only dive watch, which, if you're a purist like me, you'll agree is superior to dive watches with a date or day on the dial. They're more faithful to the classic dive watch aesthetic from the golden era, which was more purpose-driven and didn't typically have a date or additional complications on the dial. After all, who needs to know the date while exploring the ocean's vast depths? By omitting the date, time-only dive watches also offer better legibility in the water because they are clean and understated. The dial is easy to read with a quick twist of the wrist. That also means no magnifier to accompany the date, which sometimes equals improved water resistance. Now, what is the Corso Italiano? We already briefly touched on who each of the collaborating brands behind the watch are: WHATAWATCHES, a South Korean watch purveyor, and Squale, a Swiss-made dive watch company with roots dating back to the late 1950s. Now, although we previously mentioned that Squale provided cases for many of the industry's most iconic dive watch brands, they also boast a seriously impressive portfolio of their own durable dive watches. But what is the Squale Corso Italiano, and how did it come to be? As the story goes, Squale recently found an original 34mm Sabino case dating to the 1960s in a workshop in Milan. It was inspired to release it as a limited edition to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the 39mm Squale. WHATAWATCHES took that watch, a Sabino 39, and modernized it by reducing the lug width from 22mm to 20mm, and by adjusting position of the lug holes for easy strap changes. The newly designed case was named the Sub 3920, and the rest, as they say, is history. So let's dive right into the first impressions of this watch. The Sub 3920 Corso Italiano comes in a rather unassuming black box. Upon opening the box, you're presented with a really nice leather pouch. In fact, it's probably one of the most nicest pouches I ever came across for packaging. I'm even tempted to use it as a travel pouch. That's how impressed I am by it. The watch comes with the usual kit, including warranty cards, manuals, and an extra strap. James even included a couple of packets of Korean instant coffee. These will definitely come in handy for those groggy mornings. So, thanks, James. Upon first glance, there's no doubt that this watch takes a lot of inspiration from the Blancpain 50 Fathoms, but is still unique enough to stand on its own. It sports a Phenom Nato strap with a silky gloss. This is my first time experiencing this kind of strap, and I must say, it is one of the best Nato straps equipped to a watch right out of the box, so bravo. Also, this video wasn't planned, but when I was in the process of filming this, I ended up snagging one of the Blancpain 50 Fathoms Scuba, and just for giggles, I put them right next to each other, and obviously they look nothing alike, but it's cool to see the similarities between these two watches. Of course, the biggest one is going to be the bezel. That's the hallmark of the 50 Fathoms. So I thought it was a pretty cool thing to splice this in here really quick, even though it has really nothing to do with this video whatsoever, but I thought it was a fun little bit. So we'll continue with this review. With the WHATAWATCHES Squale collab offered in presentation, it did not lack in design or phenomenal wrist wearing experience. I wore the watch on the original Nato strap on the first day, but soon noticed it added unnecessary bulk to the watch case. Where the watch really shines is on the optional Horween Shell Cordovan strap. Unlike most leather straps that are thick and bulky, this one is thin, playing a key part in comfortability when wearing the watch. It allows the watch to wear closer to the skin and virtually melts away. Sometimes I even forget I'm wearing a dive watch. Furthermore, the thinness of the strap helps with the overall vintage aesthetic this watch is going for. At 39mm in diameter, the case is the Goldilocks size for many avid watch collectors. It isn't too large or dainty and stays true to traditional vintage aesthetics. Even though the case measures 39mm and a little over 40mm, if you measure the diameter of the bezel, it looks larger. I think it's caused by an optical illusion of the white dial and the distortion created by the double-domed crystal on the edges. By the way, I'm a huge fan of the crystal design. I think it adds a ton of character to this watch. Now, examining the watch face a little more, it features the coveted time-only dial I was talking about earlier, which I love because it leans even more into the classic vintage tool watch look. The matte white dial has a slight texture and is decorated with retro triangle hour markers and hands, painted with Superluminova ABL-C3 with blue lume. If you weren't already familiar, there are different variations of the Superluminova. The material used on the Corso Italiano isn't very common in the watchmaking industry, yet it is far superior for optimal legibility, even in the darkest waters. It is 105% brighter than Superluminova BGW9 and 322% brighter than Superluminova C1. That's pretty impressive. Now, I'm not sure what the font is on the bezel, but it appears to be Art Deco style. Although the font is a bit different from the original 50 Fathoms, the layout of the bezel on this model is super similar, right down to the simple hash marks. It is presented in K1 crystal that almost looks like ceramic and features lume at 12 o'clock. Furthermore, the bezel action is buttery smooth, operating at 120 clicks, and is one of the nicest feeling bezels I've ever experienced. I mean, check it out. Oh, that's so good. I'm usually not a fan of fully polished cases because they're prone to scratching, but I'm happy to see that WHATAWATCHES has added just the right amount of facets to help bring more dimension to the watch. I feel like it really works, and I'm actually looking forward to wearing this watch casually to see what marks I can put on it. Kind of like a pair of well-worn Chucks or a pair of Vans. Looking at the case from the side, we can see that it features 3 distinct layers: the case back, lugs, and bezel, and even adding more dimension to the watch and making this collab a true masterpiece from all angles. While the screw and crown is a bit hard to get to at first, maybe it's because it's due to the diamond shape, it's simple to operate once unscrewed from the case. Driving the watch itself is the ETA caliber 2824. It's worth noting that there is a phantom position at position 1, however it doesn't really bother me, but I know this is a minor annoyance for some. However, overall, the operation is smooth. The ETA caliber 2824 is an automatic mechanical movement with a standard 38-hour power reserve, just enough to set your watch down for a day and keep perfect time when you strap it back onto your wrist. It's a proven workhorse movement that delivers longevity and precision, invaluable features for any mechanical watch. The WHATAWATCHES and Squale collaboration was developed with one audience in mind: the passionate watch collector, someone who appreciates the aesthetic of a classic golden era dive watch. If you also think about it, vintage watches are becoming increasingly hard to come by in decent condition as collectors continue to snatch them up for their own collections. As a result, prices are skyrocketing. Being able to find an affordable dive watch with thoughtfully designed vintage aesthetic and modern materials is fantastic. At around 39mm in diameter, the Squale Sub 3920 Corso Italiano will also appeal to anyone with smaller to average sized wrists or anyone looking for a highly capable diver that isn't too large. With its understated aesthetic and smaller case size, the Corso Italiano gets many of the highly sought after vintage inspired details right. The Artico white dial model featured in this video was released in limited quantities of just 300 watches. So I don't mean to trigger a sense of FOMO or panic, but there are only 45 watches left in stock as of the release of this video. So if I've inspired you to buy one, act now before they're all gone. Also, there's more. WHATAWATCHES was also nice enough to include a free leather strap for all their clicky bezel friends, so be sure to mention me when placing your order to snag one. And it's the same leather strap that is featured in this video, which, like I said, is one of the best leather straps I've came across. After years and years of being a watch enthusiast, I am thrilled to finally be able to call myself the proud owner of a special Squale watch. And not just any Squale watch either, one that pays a fitting tribute to the legend of all dive watches, the Blancpain 50 Fathoms. I'm Chris from Clicky Bezel, and that's it for this episode. As always, please be sure to like and subscribe, and if you enjoyed this video, let me know what you think of the Artico in the comments below. Till then, I'll see you in the next one.